Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and good night. Slight technical hits to start, which is now solved. Thank you, love. Just proving we are live, because if we were,
We are
that
live.
wouldn't have been in there. So, welcome to another SalesTV episode. This one is focused pretty much on the North Americas, but we actually found out when someone got a map and a globe out that it actually works for some parts of the rest of the world as well. People who have got to the end of the day in the UK and want a bit of a pep me up, people in Asia just getting up as well. So I'm joined again by our fantastic co-host, co-presenter and co-founder, Tim. And Tim's going to actually introduce you to some of the people who are going to take us through today. So Tim,
Thanks,
over to
Andy.
you.
Thank you. And thank you for spending your time here with SalesTV.live. We're experimenting here with a studio, very kindly provided to us by the people here at Cranfield University. And the whole point of SalesTV is that it's to be driven by the audience. So we're looking for your comments, your questions. We've got a great guest in terms of Eric Stine, and we're really up for challenges. And if you don't agree, please say that you don't agree. Please talk with the people that are engaging as well. And the whole point of this is to be educational. What we're trying to do is provide a channel, a psychological safe space where you can come and you can learn new stuff about sales that you can go away and execute and ultimately be better salespeople, because that's something that we're all trying to do. Let me introduce you to the other two members of the panel. So we have Adam Gray. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Good night, and it's lovely to be here in the studio, albeit virtually, talking to the Americas.
Thanks, Adam. And Rob.
Hi, all. I am Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results. I suppose I am the North American representative of SalesTV today, coming to you from just outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
Thanks, Rob. And let's get our guest on, Eric. Hello, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for coming on and trying our new format out for us and being flexible and open to try this out. Eric, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you, Tim. I'm really honored that you asked, and I'm happy to be with the group today. I love the idea of giving folks a little bit of a pet me up at the end of the day in the UK. Usually I find that at the bottom of a glass, but hey, there's a first time for everything. I have been in technology sales for a little bit over 20 years. I spent a good bit of my career at places like SAP and Skillsoft, and I'm really excited to join the group today. Thank you for inviting me.
Because you did a particularly interesting transaction at Nike, didn't you, for SAP?
We partnered with Nike to help transform their supply chain to adapt to the demands of a new global economy driven by direct-to-consumer business and away from traditional first world geographies on a B2B strategy. So yeah, it was very, very exciting.
So let's get on to the discussion today in terms of the way that sales seems to be changing and the move to having different not necessarily just sales cycles in terms of, buyer close, but the business cycle that we have within an organization. I mean, how do you see things going at the moment, Eric?
I think it's a really interesting time, Tim. Listen, I believe that every major technology cycle drives new innovation, and new innovation will drive transformation for business. I think one of the things that we saw during the COVID pandemic was an acceleration in the adoption of technology. And I think one of the things we're seeing now is what happens when those technologies become the everyday expectation of business, just as we sort of adapted to that new normal of e-commerce driven consumer brands, of subscription media. We're now hit with a brand new innovation, one of sort of the mega trends in tech around generative AI. coming hot on the heels of the automation trend. And I'm not sure that businesses figured out exactly what to do with it. If they had, we wouldn't have seen a simultaneous writers and actors strike in the North American entertainment industry unions for the first time in 62 years. We wouldn't be looking at a near strike in logistics. We wouldn't be looking at an auto worker strike. And a lot of that has to do with how do we think about work as we look towards the future, as work becomes more impacted by technology than ever before. What is the balance between work and the worker, and how as a society do we want to cope with that?
And that has been a hell of a pep me up straight away, because if you're in the UK, hearing about all your strikes has made us feel a lot better. We're not the only ones.
So Adam, what your view on the business cycle that's taking place within sales?
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly technology has had a massive impact over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And I would totally agree with Eric in that businesses in many ways, I don't think this is an AI peculiar thing. Businesses in many ways have not really understood how this technology has impacted how they have traditionally done things. And I think that one of the areas where we're seeing, we as a business are seeing lots of mistakes being made, is that technology is being used to scale the wrong bits of the sales function. So like, you've got marketing automation, which means you can send out to 1 million people instantaneously. But that doesn't mean you should send out to 1 million people instantaneously, because the problem is when everybody's sending out to 1 million people instantaneously, everybody gets overwhelmed with email and they just set up blanket rules to put it straight into spam. So actually you've taken 2 steps forward and 2 or even 3 steps back, because you've made it more difficult for yourself and everybody else. And I think that we're going to see a similar thing happen with AI. It's being lauded as being the mechanism that will enable people in the social space, let's say, who can't write things, to be able to write content really efficiently and really quickly, which is going to engage their audience. The reality is that it isn't going to engage their audience, because the reason that I'm going to read your content, Eric, is because we've met and it's you, not because of any other reason than that. And the problem is when everybody in your space is producing grammatically perfect, insightful content that is lacking that personality and that connection and the context that I have, being that we've been on this call together, I think that the businesses are grasping at straws. Clearly, they all have a major problem to overcome in terms of pipeline. And they're trying, my view is that they're trying to scale the wrong parts of that sales process.
And I would actually say to the audience, if you're interested in what human, authentic, but professional content looks like, go to Eric Stine's LinkedIn profile and check out what he's posting. He is a master of doing that, and he gets loads of engagement as well. So it's a really good place to go and look at. Andy.
Yeah. Do you want the model now, or
no? In terms of where do you see the business changing?
I think there's an uncomfortable truth in reality, Tim, that we all kind of know, but no one's investigated it. And the context of that is that sales has got a set of things that are happening to it that we kind of ignore. And it's not equal across all sectors, but where I see it is that we're losing on average 30 salespeople a year. And we're not recruiting them back at any substantial level. We're mishiring and whatnot. Which actually includes then in drives quite negative behaviours. I don't know if over-quoting is the exact word, but it drives over-quoting, which then damages mental health and all of those other things, which then actually means people disengage, and actually then reinforces and drives people to, quietly quit or proactively quit. And we'll come on to it a little bit later, but I think that becomes almost, a circle that is ever decreasing. And I don't think we're focused on those as much as we could be. And I think probably, and I'd really love, Rob to jump in and then Eric, is because we still see ourselves as a number. And we don't see it as a social science. We don't see it as an art. What I love about the US, I will say that, is that the amount of colleges that are now teaching sales as a discipline, I think is a beacon. But I think there has to be more. I think there has to be something that follows up behind that, which is to be, as Tim, CPD, professional development. And, from the perspective of then the rest of the world, we've got to start doing the things that Cranfield and Middlesex University and universities in Finland and Paris, etc., are doing, which is start teaching the discipline of sales at the undergrad level.
What do you think, Eric?
I'd like to let Rob answer first because he hasn't spoken yet. And I know.
Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
That's quite all right. I'll follow on.
Oh, that's
Rob.
quite all right. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things said. Adam, I heard you say that we were automating the wrong things, for example. And I contend that it wasn't so much automating the wrong things, it was how we were automating things and what we were doing. We were making the processes fit the technology, not the other way around. And that leads to behaviors that are ultimately less than optimal. When it comes to sales training in the colleges, yes, there are quite a number of them, but I used to make the joke, nobody graduated with a degree in sales. I can't make that joke anymore. There are many a program, but as it compares to the number of colleges that teach marketing or psychology or any number of other degrees, there are still plenty of opportunities, plenty of inroads. And we need to be sure that those of us in the industry help set that foundation right. What is it to sell? Is it, oh, I know the right tech stack? Is it, it's just a matter of glad handing the right people and golfing and so on? I think the collective wisdom already knows the answer, but I don't know that we're talking about it as much. And, 85 years ago, we were given the recipe. 85 years ago, Dale Carnegie told us how to win friends and influence people. We just need to figure out now how to do that on a digital scale. And it comes down to 6 basic words, 3 basic tenets. Be approachable, be sociable, be generous. People like to do business with people they like. And when you start with that and then build the foundation from there and build the lessons around that, but always come back to that basic foundation, I think you're setting the next generation of salespeople up for long-term success, regardless of what technology comes around next.
Just to say, Bob Britton says that part of the issue is that tech and humans evolve at glacially different rates. If we don't manage tech evolution, we will end up serving tech rather than tech benefiting humans, especially with AI. And he also goes on to say, as to business cycles, the business horizon has shortened. There are fewer businesses that form with the intent of being multi-generational concern and instead form to sell to the highest bidder in 5 years or so. And great points, Rob.
Very good points. Eric, what are your thoughts?
So I'll start by piggybacking off of what Tim just said, which is I don't think anybody starts a business and doesn't think about being a multi-generational concern. I just think that in some cases, the fastest path to becoming that is to get acquired by a larger company and to become part of the bigger picture. But I don't want to distract from the main topic that was brought up. And I do very much have a point of view on it. So I was trained as an attorney, and when I went into sales, I think one of the things that I had to get over myself about was that I was leaving one of the so-called professions. And to the point that you made, Andy, not everywhere is sales treated as a profession. It's treated as a trade with no specialized training necessary to go into sales. And I actually think that is a mistake, right? Whether you study law or journalism, whether you major in marketing or finance or technology in business school, there are metrics and there is an applied science behind all of that. And there is an applied science behind sales as well. And a big piece of that is finding the balance between that which can be automated and which is repeatable and should be, and that which is not. The unique nature of human beings, their judgment, their discretion, and their ability to help each other solve problems is something that is inherently qualitative and human about selling, that, to Rob's point, will never go away. But it doesn't mean that once we have those people, we can't train them on what the right metrics and processes are and automate the right processes. In any category, when it gets created, we end up with this tech glut. Too many companies, too many subcategories, stuff that probably shouldn't exist, and somebody's going to buy it because the category's hot. And then, as Darwin said, natural selection is going to take over. Some companies will succeed and others won't, and many will consolidate to a world where we have categories like ERP and CRM. And that will happen with the sales stack as well. There are things about serving a customer and being a customer advocate, about responding to an RFP, and around solution targeting that can absolutely be automated and tied to business metrics. But if they're put in the hands of people who aren't trained to operate as professionals, it's kind of like giving a 6-year-old a weapon. Why would you do it?
A fool with a tool is still a fool.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think interestingly, that's where I think Rob Britton's viewpoint was spot on. Is we're trying to be less about emotion and less about empathy, which is what we talked about on the episode this morning, and more about it's for efficiency at all costs. And you forget that actually it's not about efficiency. Well, it is, but those other two things, that humanity piece in front of it is really, really important, because people do business with people. I think Adam, Rob, left brain, right brain. You buy an emotion and then you try and justify it, with facts and figures.
I think sometimes that gets lost, doesn't it? That sales is a human thing, people buy people, but also leadership is a people thing as well. And I know that Eric is very passionate about the people come to work with all the things that are going on at home. Whether you have older parents or you've got problem with your children or something like that, all of those things come to work with you, and as leaders we need to be empathetic and possibly sympathetic with that as well.
But we need to be that as sellers as well, right?
Yeah.
You can technology away the inefficiency, but you can't technology away the humanity. To the point that was made earlier in the conversation about marketing automation, if you're going to send 1 million emails, send them to the right 1 million recipients. Send them to the ones that have given you the right buying signals in that category and for that product. I had an experience.
But Eric,
go ahead.
The challenge there is that why should I send it to the 100,000 that are the right people when it costs me nothing more to send it to 10x more and send it to all million? Hey, you never know, I might land a lucky in those other 900,000 that I would have otherwise overlooked.
Because it's annoying and it's sloppy.
Exactly.
I had an experience 7 years ago. I was doing background research around an opportunity with a apparel and footwear retailer that focuses almost exclusively on women. But I was still going to do my homework, and I still wanted to understand their e-commerce experience, their available to promise rules, huge focus on the whole downstream customer experience, because you get a lot of abandonment in apparel and footwear if the product can't reach the customer on a direct-to-consumer basis in a reasonable time, right? If you want those Adidas Sambas and you can't get them tomorrow, then maybe you'll just buy the Nikes instead, right? And so I went online, and the only thing I could find that I could purchase, because full disclosure, I'm married to a dude, so we need no women's apparel or footwear in this house. I bought an umbrella 7 years ago. I cannot get off of their mailing list. I don't know how to say stop, unsubscribe. I've clicked every button under the sun. I keep getting just spam from them. It's annoying. Now that's an example. That's an example writ large, but there's another retailer I continually get emails from who I shop at frequently, but there's absolutely no targeting that's being done there. I have a purchase history. It is a long one that should be used to target the communication to me, and it's not. And because it isn't, I find their efforts to be problematic. And that's where technology can help.
Great point, Eric.
There is a solution to that, getting off their email list. Invoice them. Send them the canned spam and invoice them. They will fix it like that. They won't send you a check, but they will fix it.
I love that idea, Rob.
So in terms of the business cycle that an organization goes on, if you think about the process of we start the year with a figure of, you know, whatever it is in terms of what our number is, and then as we go through the year and go through a 12-month cycle, what do we see happening as we go through those 12 months?
It's fascinating. Let's see if we can actually draw it up. So I'm going to use the technology here, and hopefully people can see it. And I think people see parts of this, but they don't actually see it in its entirety. So let's just think about the start of the year. What we have, Tim, is, and Eric, Rob, and Adam, is an accepted target, an accepted number of people. So let's just call those people SP, salespeople, and we have 100 of them to keep the math simple. And we know that on average, 30% of a sales force will decide to voluntarily or erode, move out, resign within the year.
Eric, in your experience, how many people would leave a sales team in a year?
I think that we should let Andy draw the full diagram.
Okay.
Because I have had the advanced knowledge of seeing it, and I have a point of view on it, and I don't want to spoil it, and I don't want to derail us from getting through the whole model.
Excellent.
So about 30 go, okay, which leaves you with 70, okay, but you rehire back.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily. Well, we've all talked to people today, and so when you look at rehire, that's not being as successful as it used to be because less people want to be in sales, particularly young people. So you end up kind of getting back about 20 of those, okay? And the challenge about that is that has an impact, okay? You've got the quota of 10 people that needs to be put somewhere. So you end up with what we'll call OQ, over-quotaing, which then has an impact again on, well, actually, let's look at mental health, well-being. So we'll call that mental health, well-being. That goes down in a big way. And that starts to get people to look at their work-life balance. It certainly puts more people away from their OTE, on target earnings. And that in itself starts to continue to drive this perpetual kind of result. And that means in the next year, you end up with 90. And actually, I don't know about you, but I've never worked in a sales force ever where my number went down because I had less salespeople.
Yeah.
So the challenge is that your number, if it was, let's keep it really simple here, and it was 1 million, well, that's actually now 1.05 million. So you've got more quota with less people, and then you've got 27 people will leave. You know, you're not going to be as good at getting them back, so you'll only get 18, and it goes round and round and round as a cycle. And it's happening because you've got LinkedIn that actually shows now, if you've got a Navigator license, shows companies data about mean tenure.
Yep.
And if you then go in and do some desk-based research about just the sales teams, you've got an issue where you can see that the sales teams are actually lower than most of the mean tenures of these organizations. So this is happening. Now, it doesn't happen in every industry. Some is more accelerated than others. Some have very long tenured people, which in itself means skills development and skills fade are issues. But this is starting to be that ever decreasing cycle of circles that unless we start to treat people in a different way, why don't we start treating our salespeople in the same way that we actually treat our customers in order to make sure that they have a great experience with their clients, which means that we're selling more because they just love doing business with us.
So take us through that again, very quickly. Just summarize it for people.
Yeah, so it's about the fact that if you look at it, basic thing, you start off with a number of salespeople, which you've got here.
So you'll lose 30 of them.
Yeah.
Through normal attrition. You'll hire people, but the problem that you have is that you've got to rehire people, you've got to spend the time, you've got to onboard them.
Yep.
That has an impact. So what happens is that we're then in a situation where behind on the years. So immediately what people do is put the thumb screws on people saying, what are you selling? What are you doing this quarter, this month, this week? That has an impact in terms of mental health and well-being. So you end up annoying people and then they leave and basically you've got this vicious cycle going on in terms of the business planning of the company.
Yeah, I mean, there's work been done that actually, this is getting the maths right. It's equal to their target. That's what it's been, actual high top line revenue, and actually that's going through to your straight line. So there's a real financial impact to try and avoid this if you can, and do all the things you can to maintain people's engagement with you as an employer. And actually, how do they do that? That's the challenge.
Eric, so you got an opinion?
Yeah,
Challenge it, please.
So I don't buy it. And let me be a little bit more specific and a lot less insulting, because I don't mean to insult you at all, Andy. I believe that it happens. However, I believe that it doesn't happen to great sales leaders if those sales leaders are respected and valued by the two people who are the most important business partners, their CEOs and their CFOs. Because when you sit down in the budgeting process, as you plan the year for the following year, there are a couple of things you should know, right? What is your exit forecast for the year, and what has been your growth rate over the past several years? In other words, what is your trajectory? What does your trend line look like? And what have been the variables in that trend line? Have they been dependent on year over year increases in headcount? Has headcount been flat? Has headcount been declining? But what is the performance of your business on a business as usual basis? The second thing you need to know is what is your attrition and your attrition timing, because it is often predictable. People will leave about 60 days after the end of the year where they get the big Q4 commission check. People will leave the Monday after President's Club. You can be guaranteed there'll be a couple of resignations of people who held out for the trip. Those cycles, and if you have a good HR business partner, she or he can help you understand what's your trend line on attrition and what is the seasonality of that attrition. You should have a ramp cycle built in to your hiring time. Based on your relationship with TA, it takes X period of time to identify and hire and onboard a candidate, and you should have a sense of how long it takes people to be productive. In one of the roles I last left, we believed that over the first full year, I would get about 50% productivity against quota on that head if they started day one of the fiscal year. So if I hired in advance of the year with the intention that somebody would start on the first day of the fiscal year, I'd get about 50% of their quota out of them. And then in year two, if they stayed the full year, I would get 100% of their expected productivity out of them. You need to know your sales productivity metrics and where your over and underperformers are. Attrition matters differently if it's your bottom 20% leaving as opposed to your top 20%. What does that distribution look like? All of this is data that can be planned for as you sign up for a budget. So you can say to your CFO and your CEO, this is what I can sign up for. Or I need X more heads to sign up for the number that you want me to. Or I have to have elasticity, so I'm hiring the 20 new hires before the other 30 a trip. And I will balance hiring timing against that. Or I've got a slush fund in my budget that I can use to pay if I'm overhired as opposed to underhired. This is the part about how we technology away inefficiency as opposed to technology away humanity. The problem that you pointed out is real, but sales leaders have a responsibility to get ahead of it. Otherwise, they're not doing their share owners, their peers, or their teams any favors, because to your point, then it just puts pressure on people to over deliver. So that's my perspective on it, Tim.
Eric, thank you for that. Rob,
all of that is
Does that happen?
Rob, go ahead.
All of that is predicated, as you said, on leaders that listen. A listening CFO, a listening CEO. In my experience, the leaders are listening to their VCs who are commanding of them certain numbers. And the numbers are the numbers, everything else be damned. I have seen organizations where 30% attrition was not the number. It was 60%. And they weren't hitting their metrics and they weren't hitting their quotas. And it wasn't just a sales spiral, it was a death spiral. How do you come in and turn those things around? Because empty seats don't fill quota.
I believe we're facing that problem right now as we see a whole bunch of investors sitting on assets with exit multiples that they were expecting to hit in years 3 or 4, and they may not hit in year 6 or 7. Math is math, right? Math doesn't change. Trend lines exist for a reason, and while you may get a black swan event here or there, if you're not treating sales as a profession, if you're not listening to your CRO about his numbers as much as you're listening to the CFO, and if the two of them aren't completely aligned on what the numbers are telling them, then you're going to have that problem and you're going to create that death spiral, and then it's just unavoidable.
Adam, you were chomping at the bit to say
come on,
something.
Adam.
Come on. It won't be controversial.
Well, it was really to underline what Rob said. You know, I think that what you're talking about there, Eric, is a beautiful vision of sophisticated people looking at the data, chewing on that data, and making smart decisions based on the data and fact rather than opinion. And opinion is actually you're a crap salesman, you're not working hard enough, get out there and sell some more stuff. And the fact is that actually there are not enough people in the business, but I'm not, because that reflects on me having not planned ahead. And I think that, you know, you have, and I'm not disputing what you said because it's absolutely true in the way things should be. You worked for one of the most sophisticated enterprise level data and software companies in the world who had all of this stuff at their fingertips. Our experience of working with that organization is exactly that. They're a bunch of extremely clever people that help organizations make better decisions. There are an awful lot of enterprises out there for whom what you're talking about is an absolute moon landing. The idea that you would actually map when people are leaving, and the fact that I know that you're about to resign after President's Club. Well, there's a 20% higher chance you'll resign immediately after President's Club. Most of the senior sales leaders that I've engaged with would see that as a personal slight and would get really cross about that because they wouldn't be looking at those signs. They wouldn't be looking at that data and saying, this is not a personal thing. This is not because you hate me. This is simply the nature of you developing your career and wanting to open new horizons. And I think that that if most organizations were, as you just described them, we wouldn't be facing this death spiral, as Andy called it, that we're currently facing.
Eric, I've got a...
I think they have to.
Go on,
Go
Eric.
ahead, Tim. Sorry. I was going to say, I think they have to be. And they're only going to have that capability more and more with generative AI and the ability to build algorithms around that data and to make it much more consumer grade and enterprise scale. But ultimately, the numbers are the numbers. We can believe what we want to believe and be disappointed, or we can believe the truth and we can act on it. But it doesn't really change the reality of it.
Eric, we've got a comment here from Bob Britton. And I'm not quite sure the context of this, but I think it would be, so Bob says, sounds like he's talking about enablement. Now, I wanted to pick up on that in terms of this vision that you offer in terms of here is what a CRO should be doing. What support would you expect from that in terms of sales operations, sales enablement, or whatever structure that you're marketing? What should actually be there to support you?
When I was a CRO, I had a standing meeting every week with what I called my core team, which was semi-ridiculous because I spoke to the three of them either individually or as a group nearly every day and sometimes multiple times a day. That was my HR business partner, my finance business partner who sat in the FP&A team, and my head of operations who ran sales operations and enablement and our program management function. But that's the support that you need. And then you need to make sure that you're communicating that effectively and representing it accurately within your peer group at an ELT level, so that your product leader understands what your dependencies are on feature availability or platform integration or the remediation of bugs or security risks. Your marketing leader needs to understand how much pipeline is it going to take to make the segment of the number that is dependent either on leads from your install base on cross-sell or upsell or new customer acquisition. You need to be an active partner to your marketing leader to say, hey, listen, if you had an extra $1 million, do you know where to spend that and how the marketing funnel is going to convert and how that translates to leads? Do you know how to best put that money to work for me? But at its core, Tim, you need an operations leader, a finance leader, and an HR leader that can support you with this information and help you make those decisions. You should never make them alone.
Right. Thank you. Andy, do you want to come back?
No, because I actually agree with Eric. Actually, I mean, but so it's great.
I can see it from your face.
But actually, the guys Rob and Adam have actually kind of nailed it on the head, which is, Eric's on this show for a reason, because he's the North Star of what should be happening.
Yeah.
I would add the context of, actually, it's not just been about a sales leader. Eric is clearly a leader.
Yes.
And that's the chasm. If you look at somebody like Phil Jones from Brother, he obviously brutally honestly talks about his transition from being a sales leader to being the CEO. And I can hear that in what Eric's saying. I've made that transition. But what Adam said is quite right, and what Rob said is quite right, is Eric's a bit of an anomaly, unfortunately. So back to Bob's point, it is about enablement, but it's about enablement as you as an individual, not your sales teams. So when you walk to your CFO and you walk to your CEO, they see you as on parity. And you can see that in the way that Eric is presenting himself and the things he talks about. So he's very, very credible. Some people come in and it's like, yes, you're just there to exercise the number.
Yeah.
And so actually, I think Eric is spot on agreeing it can be avoided completely, but it's unfortunately only avoided by some really good outliers in sales leadership. And that doesn't mean the others are bad. We've talked about it before. It's addictive behaviors of, this is what happened to me when I was 25 and joined, and as a consequence, this is how I'm going to behave today. And frankly, my sales leaders, when I was first in financial services, were just out there driving a number. They didn't do anything about their own development. They didn't do anything about my development. And it was all about, here's your margin, here's your quota, here's a map, here's a car, off you go.
I was having a conversation with Eric, and I don't know if you can share these figures, Eric, but when you were in your CRO position, we were hit with the war in Ukraine, and you did an analysis of your sales team, and I've not heard anyone else do this, and say, here we are, we're being hit with a black swan situation. This could have an impact globally in terms of people's buying process. Who in my team has actually lived through these things before? So if we think about 9/11, that was what, 22, 23 years ago?
22 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. So you did some analysis of your. So you what was it? I can't remember. Was it?
It wasn't the war in Ukraine. It was actually the COVID pandemic, and
okay.
It was during the time I was Chief Revenue Officer at Qualtrics, and so I had an incredible team around the world, and SDRs, sellers, a really, really, really fantastic team. But when I looked at the demographics of the team, they were heavily in North America, and based on their age profiles, I looked at two events, one acute and the other chronic. 9/11 was an acute event, happened September 11th, 2001. There was a market correction that followed it that lasted about 6-7 months. And then there was the financial crisis that started really in September of 2008, where we didn't really see full recovery until about 2011, 2012. And so it was a chronic event. And when I looked at my organization, I found that more than half of the organization had not worked through the financial crisis of 2008 to 2012. And more than 2/3 of the organization had not worked through the events of September 11th. And so they weren't prepared for it. They didn't have the resilience that somebody who had been in the workforce, even if they were early in the workforce, would have had as a function of those events. And so we used Pulse technology to understand what they were struggling with and how we could support them. Many of them lived in living environments. Maybe they shared an apartment with roommates, or they were in apartments that weren't set up for work from home. Many relied on some of our central offices in the Salt Lake City metropolitan area and in Dallas and North Carolina, because that's where they got lunch and in many cases breakfast every day. And so what we did was we tried to account for those corrections, create community, and create a level of services for our team that met them where they were and what their experience level was, so that we could try and help them through it. I'm sure we made 1,000 missteps, and I'm probably only aware of half of them. But we did start by looking at the data to figure out who was going to need help and what kind of help were they going to need to continue to be productive and to feel safe at work.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example of somebody, actually thinking about the data and thinking then about their workforce. And I just wanted to get Eric to share that.
Actually, I'd say just the opposite, Tim. He looked at the people first and then the numbers. How many organizations did we hear went through layoffs and such because we weren't going to make our number, and then worry about the people factor? Again, Eric, you're proving that you are an anomaly. People don't typically behave like that. They should, but they don't.
But I think that goes back to treating sales as a profession. When you have a
Amen.
job category that anybody can enter, we're actually making our jobs harder, because our ability to filter applicants is extraordinarily difficult, because we can't rely on their education or their training as a lever of their experience. And if we actually, it's not about creating a barrier to entry, but it's creating entry criteria that are meaningful. It would mean that it would make the recruiting job so much easier for us.
Adam, what are your thoughts on this?
Quickly,
Yeah,
because we've got 1 minute 38 seconds.
Absolutely right, Rob. You nailed it there. Eric, you are the exception proving the rule. It is insightful, and it is the way that business should be done now and will be done, must be done in the future. But I think that particularly sales has so many Luddite, macho attitudes attached to it that there isn't room for this kind of behaviour. And I think that certainly Tim and I, when we worked together, saw it with 25% of the sales leaders were old school. That's the nice way of describing them. And it wouldn't even be tolerated today, but certainly in the future, it not only won't be tolerated, it will significantly impact on organisations' ability to execute on what they need to.
Andy.
I think that's great. And so with 45 seconds, Eric, it's been absolutely humbling
Eric,
to be
it has
hanging out with you.
been awesome.
Absolutely
Thank you so
brilliant.
much.
Thank you so much, Rob, for organising this from the North America's viewpoint, and Adam for being a wonderful co-host. I'd just like to thank again the guys here at the Grenville Studios and Cranfield University. I think we're at a real watershed, and it's been wonderful to spend time with such an exceptional leader and hear about, as Rob says, the people first, and actually look at how we can help people actually uncover and reflect on what they're doing to maybe address these things. Because I think one thing is for sure, everybody, this isn't going to be the last time that we have these things. The cycles seem to be getting shorter, and we get impacted more and more. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.